Uh, Actually, I'm here to introduce and invite a very esteemed and distinguished guest, uh, 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 Dr. Shireen Hunter, uh, who is who has spent all her life studying Middle East, but not only Middle East, but Middle East, Central Asia, Islamic world in general. She has written 19 books, tens of articles and essays, hundreds, I'm so sorry, hundreds of articles and essays. And I invite her to start her speech on post-Islamism. Maybe after you finish with your speech, we will have an opportunity for Q&A, and then we will conclude. Please have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, bon appetit, as we say in Muslim states. And I hope that my talk will not give you any indigestion. So I think that you will forgive me if something like that happens. In general, I am not very keen on sort of all encompassing aphorism like Islamism and by the same token, post-Islamism, because the world, unfortunately, cannot be squeezed into sort of slogan-like statements. Nevertheless, I also understand the usefulness of such concepts as a tool for analysis. We have to have some sort of guideposts. We have to have some tools in order to complete our analysis. Therefore, I am going to use both the word Islamism as well as post-Islamism. I believe that before we talk about, post-Islamism, first we have to have a definition of what is Islamism. Because I think that the Islamism is like the proverbial elephant and the blind man in Rumi's tale. So depending on which part of the elephant you touch, you are going to have a different definition of the elephant. And the same thing applies to Islamism. But I will get into that. The other thing that we have to answer is that, is Islamism a uniform phenomenon, or there are different kinds of Islamism? And the last thing is that for me, as a person that is basically a political scientist and an international relations expert rather than a philosopher or a religious scholar, is that to include the element of power. I think that one thing that in all these things we keep forgetting, there is all these theories and so on basically come about in order to gain power or to regain power or bring somebody out of power. So I think that these are the things that we have to first address. Then once this is done and we accept the phenomenon, the conclusion that Islamism has basically, the way we knew it in the 1980s and 1990s, in the 80s, Iran was the basic focus of that. In the 1990s and beyond, Afghanistan became really the crucible of these things. Then what is likely to follow Islamism? Because if you want to get rid of Islamism, you have to have a different discourse. You have a discourse to compete with Islamism and a discourse that is capable of actually attracting the people. I have three possibilities that I will go into it. One is, of course, liberal democracy. I think that even though liberal democracies are under stress, anyone who is living in the United States, we hear constantly that democracy is in threat that one running president for president is a mortal threat to democracy, and the other says it's the other one who is a threat to democracy. So even in established democracies, democracy is not something that you have it and then you can have it forever and ever. It's an evolving concept, and the people's understanding of that and attitude to that changes given the dynamics of the country. That obviously would be the best outcome. It would be nice if 100 flowers bloomed and suddenly the entire Muslim world became democratic and everybody lived happily ever after. That, unfortunately, my friends, is unlikely to happen. And I will go and say later why not. The other alternative, which is actually more likely, is different forms of nationalism. And in certain contexts, this nationalism has a better chance than in some other contexts. I like to believe that a post-Islamic Iran will be a more inclusive, please mark my word, most inclusive and less ethnocentric nationalism. In other words, and I will tell you that the concept of it is already being developed. The other thing, which unfortunately, Henry Kissinger said, when in doubt, be pessimistic. And I am unfortunately a little bit tend to be like that. The other thing most probably is what I call secular authoritarianism, which unfortunately is rampant already in the Muslim. Well, let me now first to give you what is Islamism. Islamism is a theory that believes that, to begin with, believes that everything in the world that needed to be known and all the solutions to the world's problems and everything for the governing of society is already included in Islam. So if you want to get anywhere, all you have to do is implement Islam. I remember, for example, I wasn't alive actually during the Iranian constitutional revolution, even though I am getting old quite a bit, but I was not alive in 1906. So, but at that time, while the constitutionalists were talking about writing a new constitution for Iran, the then Islamists, which were a very much more mild form, said, why do we need a constitution? We have the Quran. Quran is the best constitution. So the cornerstone of Islamism, I think, is that Islam has got everything that you want. And all you have to do is to implement Islam. This, of course, we know that it's not true because people have tried to implement Islam for at least almost now 15 centuries, depending which year, lunar or solar, you are going. And we know that they haven't been able to create the utopia or the Madineh Fazileh. So there is a lot more involved than having a wonderful blueprint. I mean, one could say that in America now, despite all I sometimes compare, at least in talking with my husband, compare the discussions right now in the US Supreme Court about a literal reading of the American Constitution or a more contextual reading to the debate among the Islamic scholars. If you are, for example, a staunch Salafi or so on, you want only the text and that nothing can go any further than that. But if you are a Mu'tazili or you had a more contextualist, you say, no, we have to interpret it on the basis of the time and space. So I'm just trying to say this comparison to also say that dispel a little bit this aura of exoticism that has covered the Islamic world. I think it's just, I don't agree with everything that Edward Said has said in Orientalism. He is a little bit responsible in certain areas of his own version of Orientalism, not giving enough credit for non-Arab Muslims and so on, but that's a different story. But the fact of the matter is that human societies, by and large, the same dynamics operates in them. And an essential element of dynamic is power. So as to the various Islamism, yes, there are very different Islamism. For example, the Wahhabi Islam of Saudi Arabia that reportedly the young prince, well, he's not so young anymore, he's getting to be almost 40, wants to change, was a much, much harsher, something that I grew up as a Muslim. I can't recognize the Islam of my upbringing, neither with the current attitude of Iranian Muslims, although compared to the before Ben Salman Wahhabism is just, I think, is very liberal. I mean, everything is a matter of degrees. But that Islamism is totally different from the, for example, Islamism that was in Egypt, the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, and or some Islamism in South Asia and so forth. Part of this is because Islam itself is different. As somebody said, he said Islam was like a river that flew in different beds. And depending on the composition of the bed, it took the color of that. The fact is that a lot of people in Iran have talked about the so-called Iranian Islam. And that is absolutely correct. What we have happened in Iran is not an Iranian Islam. It was because the Iran's Islamists were influenced by Sayyid Qutb, and then their years of fighting in Lebanon and all that. And I find their Islam alien to everything that I knew and I grew up with. But so this is not to say which is good or which is bad, but it's like the same thing like Christianity. Christianity in Southern Europe and Christianity in Russia are two different things. And this happens to any idea that is then implemented within a certain geographic context. So there are what I call national Islamisms. You know, Iranian Islamism is absolutely different, and not just because the majority of Iranians used to be Shiite, and now I cannot vouch for them, whether they still are or not, so I have no idea. But, and so that is different than, for example, Islamism in Morocco, as our colleague so rightly said. It is true that the Moroccans have an advantage because the Moroccan monarchy claims descent from grandson of Muhammad, from Hassan. And so they feel that they have a legitimate right to that. And obviously Algerian Islam was different and Egyptian Islam is different and all that. And so these are the things, but there is a much more important thing that has happened. And I think it started first in Iran, but I don't want to give all the credit to that because there were other countries as well. And that is what I call the reformist Islam. The reformist Islam, which some people have called it neo-Mu'tazili, which means the use of ijtihad for adapting Islam to the current conditions. And I think that you can have a lot of ways of, I wrote a book called, edited, but I wrote a chapter myself, Reformist Voices of Islam, mediating Islam and modernity. And in that, I discuss all these things. The fact is that you can have a liberal interpretation of Islam. Somebody asked, for example, what is the position of Islam regarding non-Muslims? Well, if you take Prophet saying that La ikraha fid din, then it means that they are free. In an Islamic state, they enjoy all rights. However, this was stuff that Prophet said while he was in Mecca. When he went to Medina and actually had to run a society, he became a politician. And so he started a little bit changing. And so the laws of blasphemy came into being and so on and so forth. So this is what I'm saying. We do have, and one option for future would be what I call a liberal Islam. Because the reason I think this is useful and important, that most of Muslim countries have a very weak sense of nationalism, especially a sense of civic nationalism. And their societies, even the ones, old ones like Egypt or Iran, and of course, Afghanistan is a historically very old country, but as a modern state is a new country. And I think, therefore, Islam as a unifying factor can be good. And of course, a country like Pakistan without Islam, they have nothing. I mean, that was the raison d'etre. That's why they were created, Pakistan, as opposed to others that I suppose are on Pak. So this is what I am saying. But Islamists went really too far, in my opinion. For example, the late Farooqi, he went on and talking about the Islamization of knowledge. Well, how can you Islamize knowledge? Knowledge does not have a religion, you see. But he went on to saying, and I think that's what Iranians have tried, and that is really going nowhere. But I must add here, which brings me to the politics. The reason people reacted so much to Islamism was not because, let's be frank about it, and I am known for being frank, and over the years I have paid the price in terms of my own career and so on for it. The reason they don't like Islamism is not because they put women in parda or in chador or whatever they are called in other places and so on. The version of Islamism they don't like is the one that is a politically activist. Politically activist, which means that they are challenging the existing international order. So I think, as I had written in the 80s and so on, Islamism, at least the Iranian Islamism, was, I would call, a new version of third worldism, a challenge to the existing international system. And to be honest with you, I think that the reason a lot of people in the West reacting to Taliban it's not because how they treat the woman, but I think they feel that they failed in Afghanistan, and that is a sort of a hurt pride that is causing these things to happen. Now, why did Islamism triumphed? Islamism, at least since the late 19th century, was not really a major force in the Islamic world. The forces that were animating Muslim societies were three. There was obviously anti-colonialism, desire for independence. The other one was development. Muslim words everywhere, I have read this every place from Algeria to Lebanon to Iran. Muslim scholars were writing, the question they were asking is that why we declined like this? Why we came into such a sorry state that everybody is coming and taking our lands, whether it is French in Morocco, the British in other parts, and the Russians and Britain in Iran and Afghanistan and whatever. And so their main goal was development. And then, of course, nationalism, because 19th century was the age of nationalism in France and Europe. And so these people were getting everything from things. And for a while, this was the dominant discourse. The other dominant discourse, which unfortunately, in my humble opinion, people may disagree, had a very destructive impact and derailed the natural development of some of these Muslim countries, was communism, which was then married to the Soviet power and expansionism. And they sold this ideology that somehow you are going to have the heaven on earth by becoming communist. And I have to say that in Iran, the Islamic revolution is a misnomer. Revolution in Iran was made by the communists, whether the pure communists, like the Tudeh party or the so-called Fedayan Khalq or whatever, or the Islamo-Marxists, like the Mujahideen Khalq. They made the revolution, as somebody said, and then the mullahs had a coup d'etat. But the point I have to say is that why did they do that? Because they realized that the people at that time were religious. And the atheism of communism was not going down well with them. And so they coached their kind of uh, discourse in Islamic terms. So the proletariat became the mustazafin, and the imperialists became the mustakbarin, you know, the istikbar became international imperialism and so on and so forth. So I think that this is one thing we have to understand. And the part of the problem was that, to be honest with you, the Cold War frightened the people in some of the Muslim countries, and they consequently they clamped down so much on all leftist ideas, rather than letting them to get involved in the overall discourse of the society, so that there was no way, there was no alternative ideology left to combat Islamism. And the Islamists benefited from this, how shall I say, from this vacuum. And so I think it's, and also I don't want to get into a very difficult thing, but I think that everybody needs to go and revisit Iranian revolution if they can. I mean, I don't recommend it, but if you want to understand the dynamic, particularly how international dynamism contributed to this thing, including the way it turned into a more radical thing, and while all the reformist president failed because outside world did not respond. I actually would say that the great powers fear Islamic modernism and Islamic reformism more than anything else, because that is a discourse that they cannot just say that it is obscurantist and so on. So, and you know, as we were studying this book I did, and the gentleman who was writing a study on Morocco, he told me, he said that the regime dislikes Islamic reformists more than anybody else. They don't mind the Al-Adlu, Al-Ihsan, or some other groups and so on, but the reformists, no kind of time for them. So I think that also the great powers contributed, the dynamics, international dynamics that led to the Iranian Revolution, and why that revolution took the direction of the. Just one word to go into Afghanistan. I don't have to add to that. All I have to say that really my heart bleeds for Afghans. I think that in the past 40 some odd years, these people have suffered more than one can endure. And it didn't have to happen like this. It didn't have to happen like this. Afghanistan, even before the invasion of the Russians, again, was a victim of the Cold War dynamics. A lot of things that happened in there. But mostly after the Soviet withdrawal, it didn't have to go this way. And I have to say this, I know some people are going to be, the United States and Britain particularly, they have a lot to answer why this whole question, and of course, Pakistan. The Taliban could not have come into being without a thing. And I think you should go and read a lot of books. There's so much books on this, and I have read them all. You have to see how this happened. After 1989, in my humble opinion, they should have made a deal with Najibullah. Najibullah was saying even that I will fight Iranian mullahs. What else you want? And then after that, I'm sorry, the policy of containing Iran contributed to the choice of the Taliban. General Babar apparently said to Secretary Perry that I promised that I will block Iran in Afghanistan. And it has continued. And even they like the Taliban better. Why Ahmad Shah Massoud, they didn't give him a chance? He got to Kabul first. But of course, he was a Tajik, a Persian speaker, and that wasn't kosher in that sort of. Okay, this is it. Of course, I know a lot of people would disagree my reading, and I understand that, and I respect their views. So just 2 minutes, what is likely to succeed, assuming that post-Islamism is here? I hope it was. I predicted in 84 in an article in New York Times that post-Khomeinism is in Iran. And I remember David Ignatius mocked me. He said, ha, ha, ha. She says that post-Khomeinism is already. But I didn't say what shape or post-Khomeinism is going to take. And then I made some suggestions that, of course, they forgot about it. They forgot everything I said. Anyway, so, but what is going to succeed here? Different things in different countries. Again, I betray my Iranian origin, but I don't have to apologize for that. We are all born somewhere. Some are luckier than the others. I think in Iran, there is a chance of some version. I don't want to use the word Iranian nationalism, but what I like to call Iranism. Iranism, which means that putting Iran first. And I think that the late Javad Tabatabai, a major philosopher, has a concept which he calls it Iran Shahri. In other words, citizenship of Iran, which I think is a very good thing. And if you know that in the old days, during the Sassanid and so on, Iran was known as Iran Shah. It was Iran and non-Iran. And Afghanistan was Iran. And I think that could come. There will be some element of Islam in that. Because even though religious sentiments have cooled in Iran, especially, I suppose, among what we are calling Generation Z, but as a culture, I mean, people say post-Christian Europe, maybe, but Christianity is part and parcel of rhythm of life in the countries who used to be Christian. You don't have to go to church every day to be a Christian. You know, your birth, your death, your everything is managed by that. So there's always going to be an Islamic dimension to the Iranian thing. And all the people that are want to in absolutely secular Iran and so on, I don't think that we are there. I mean, look at even in the United States. I mean, what do you think this fight over abortion is about? It's about a God-based system of belief and an absolutely secular system. So this debate has not even finished in secular society. In fact, the regime has had to gradually make some concessions to the Iranian dimension of Iranian identity. They are not calling, it depends where you are coming from. They call Iranian culture Iranian Islamic or Islamic Iranian. So they realize that the Iranian element, the 1500 years before Islam, has left its imprint and you cannot get out of that. And hopefully what I hope that within that, then we can have to see much more participatory politics. And rather than to have the dictate of the Wali Faqih who speaks, in the name of God. I mean, in the old days, for example, Pope could delegitimize kings in Europe. And so Khamenei is playing Pope in a way you could say. But I think that is what it's going to be. In other countries, certain countries like Morocco and so on, they have this monarchical institution. And so hopefully I hope that they will be able to open up their system somewhat more and all that, but that's their business, not for me to talk about. My own problem is that most likely it's going to be more of the secular authoritarianism, like al-Sisi, the Egypt, al-Sisi, Persian Gulf, sheikdoms. Turkey is a hybrid thing, frankly, but I have my reservations about Turkish democracy under Erdogan. So I think that, the post-Islamism and Islamism are in a way interconnected. But a lot will also depend on the international players' role. I think so far, unfortunately, they have played a negative role. I mean, in Egypt, if you want democracy, you cannot just say we want democracy provided that we like the results. And if you don't like the result, then it's not democracy. I have no time for Ikhwan al-Muslimin. In fact, you can say that I'm a victim of Islamism. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here. But having said that, if you want democracy, then you have to respect the results. And so it all depends also whether, and of course, in situations of conflict, great power rivalry, the normal functioning of the societies becomes disrupted, completely disrupted. You have coup d'etats, you have interventions, you have invasions. And so I think that when we talk about, in general, this type of situations regarding Muslim world, but Muslim world is a too wide word. I don't want to use it. If we are talking what I call, I don't even want to use Egypt. Egypt is a sui generis. And great powers have an interest in keeping Egypt as is, as Turkey. They have never played with these two countries. Iran is a different story. Every time they have interfered, and it has been worse and worse and worse. Afghanistan, of course, we know about that. So I think that what we are really talking about is what I nowadays fashion is to call West Asia. They don't call Middle East, I think, just rightly, because, but so I think that we have to keep our minds open. And if we can intellectually juggle too many things, it's not so easy. Some countries are better off, they are more homogeneous. The more homogeneous a country, the more likely to reach consensus. The more diverse a country, it's difficult to get, consensus. And so, I mean, even in the established democracy, I would never have, thanks, Lord. Okay, I think as we say in Farsi, بندازه کافی روده درازی کردم. I think that I will stop by now, but it was a lot to cover. And these were some of the things that previous speakers didn't refer to. I just really wanted to make the connection between discourse and power. Discourse and power. And mullahs in Iran wanted to get to power. They were tired of the traditional Shia thing that said, no Islamic government until the 12th Imam comes. But they wanted power. So what do? You have to have a discourse to go against the Pahlavi modernism and so on. And Ikhwan wanted power. And if you want to go against Arab nationalism and Mubarak and so on, you have to have Islamism. So you see, if they had had a more participatory politics from the beginning, Islamists would not have come to the fore. And of course, some countries were lucky because great powers did not. I mean, I will use one example, just so that be specific. The Algerian movement, FIS, and I was actually in Algeria when the FIS won the municipal elections. And they were going to win the parliamentary election. Anybody that was in Algeria at the time could see. But the Algerian government, with the French and American other blessing, fought the FIS for what, more than 10 years. But in Iran, they told the Shah that, oh, no, don't you use military power against the Islamists. And of course, I blame him, because if you are the king of a country, you say, it's none of your business. I'm going to do what is good for my country. But you know how it is. As Frantz Fanon said, the worst aspect of colonialization is self-colonialization. This belief in the non-Western countries that somehow West is superior. Anyway, that's enough. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I talked too much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shireen. Really, your speech was very rich and insightful, and it covered all the questions that I had, maybe
What I
the audience have. So,
say, being old and having lived longer, it gives you a certain advantage.
thank you so much. Okay, I end it here and over to you.
Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much.
much, Doctor.